I want to start by thanking everyone for joining us from wherever you are today. My name is Brian Brown. I am an associate professor of science education, and I have the privilege of being this year's director for Stanford Graduate School of Education's R2l program. And R2l is the program for the study of race, inequality, language, and education. And what that means is that we want to make sure ideas don't live in silos. We need to think across disciplines as we talk to each other to understand how inequality shapes the world. But in order to do that, we need linguists, we need scientists, we need sociologists, we need people studying together. And in that spirit, we're able to have you join us today to hear from an incredible scholar and an incredible student. One of the things that I've had the privilege of doing over the years is hearing the speaker who you're going to hear today talk about how communities change, things moving from segregation to integration to gentrification, right back to segregation, and how we need to understand the history of movements so we can support people in meaningful ways. And so we're looking forward to learning today. So to give our speakers the appropriate introduction, I have the privilege of introducing one of our incredible graduate students. And so today, you're going to be hearing from Ruben Gonzalez, who's a first-year PhD student in our program in R2l. Prior to joining us, he taught English in Sacramento, California, and he focuses on how teachers of color can engage in critical pedagogy. And so would you do me a favor, Ruben, come in and introduce our speakers for the day.
Hello, Dr. Brown. Thank you for the fantastic introduction. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you for joining us in the Graduate School of Education's R2l Speaker Series. So this is the last installment for the 2021 year. And we hope that you've enjoyed each and every one of these sessions. I know it's been a great learning experience for myself. And like always, feel free to post us on Twitter, Instagram, what you're learning, how you're feeling, and specifically using the hashtag R2l 2021. So today we have two phenomenal scholars, speakers, and just overall great people. We have Dr. Manuel Espinoza and Ms. Frida Silva, and they'll be sharing their talk entitled Anthropologists of Our Culture, Dignity, Rhetoric, and Advocacy. So in their talk, Dr. Espinoza and Ms. Frida Silva will tell us how the Right to Learn Dignity Lab came to be formed and how he and his undergraduates created a Dignity Handbook. The group's current efforts to amend the educational clause of the Colorado Constitution will also be discussed in detail. Now, a little bit more about these two fantastic people that I've had the honor of getting to know the last few weeks. So Dr. Espinoza asked me to mention that he was born on the 5th floor of the Denver General Hospital and was a child of desegregation, specifically Gayes v. Denver School Board No. 1, 1973. He was raised in the Five Points and Curtis Park neighborhoods, and he is a proud graduate of UCLA, but even more proud that Drs. Chris Gutierrez, Mike Rose, and Frederick Erickson taught him what he knows about anthropology and learning. We also have Frida, who is one of R2l Senior Research Associates and a first-generation college graduate of CU Denver. She specializes in writing and developing R2l's digital presence and considers the people in R2l her familia. So without further ado, I pass the mic to the fabulous Dr. Espinoza and Ms. Silva.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you. Frida, you on point, Frida?
All the time, Profe.
All right. If I may impose for a second, I want to hear the names of the members of the Right to Learn Dignity Lab ring out. I never used to have to write it down, but we've grown so much and so complex that I have to read it from a list. Otherwise, I'll forget someone. Tanya Soto Valenzuela, Mandy Wong, Tamara Lungay, Maria Sanchez Velasco, Valencia Seidel, Arlis Howard, Diego Ulivari, Raquel Isaac, Frida Silva, Adria Padilla Chavez, Charla Agnoletti, Lima Alali, Soraya Latif, Taylor Smith, Veronique Mua, and Katie Reese Gonzalez. And it always brings me a proper portion of joy to hear those first-gen immigrant young people's names festoon the air. The title of our talk, Anthropologists of Our Own Culture, is taken from a description of the Right to Learn Dignity Lab that was given to us by James Boyd White of the University of Michigan Law School. In fact, today you'll see how we are anthropologists of our own research project. because we have grown so complex that we had to rediscover in some ways the things that we played a role in creating. So, I imagine Professor White gave us that name because of our focus on local problems, the homegrown obstacles to providing an edifying public education to all people, i.e. the education clause of the Colorado Constitution, which you'll hear about a lot more at the end of our talk. I imagine it was because of our drive to apply the knowledge we generated to the solving of a problem, our problem. Now, the story of right to learn can be told from any number of angles, which would result in a vast quantity of narratives. You could begin logically at the number one, as in the founding member of Right to Learn, Tania Soto Valenzuela. From number one, you could happily skip to two, because you need at least two to make a jazz group, two to make a church, two to make a research group out of sight. If you skip happily to two, you'll get to the second founding member, me. And the relationship, the friendship, and the mutual mentorship between one and two could fill our time with ease. And I could tell that tale over and over in this way. The story of R2l is a story of how people who met as professor and student became a research group, which then became a family, engrafted kin that conducts research. You could begin with the quantity 15, which would give you our approximate age. R2l in some ways is a teenager. Así que when we get to June, blow us a kiss, because we're gonna go for our driver's permit so we can cruise federal. So this afternoon, you're going to hear about a thing called the Dignity Handbook. And the person leading that portion of the talk is Frida Silva, Senior Research Associate in R2l, or as she is known within the R2l group as the Beyonce of the micro essay. I met her when she was 18. She was a student in my Equality, Rights, and Education core course. Here's my memory of her. An enthusiastic young woman seated in the front row, feet dangling from the chair because she's petite. A live intellect, oversized, stylish glasses, with questions galore. And here's how she would signal when that question was ready to be unleashed. With that arm so high up. Now, the handbook. First of all, why create one? What was the need? In 2017, the clarity of purpose that the Right to Learn carries around so confidently today, it was only beginning to develop. It's kind of like the first images from the Hubble telescope. They were fuzzy but promising and in need of corrective vision. So what we thought in 2017 was that the education clause of the Colorado Constitution, the clause that governs the provision of public education in our state, that it was in need of amendment. But that's yesterday's news in our state. What made this decision transformative was we thought that the people who should do that should be us, and that the new amendment should be written in the language of human rights with the lexicon of human dignity. Now, let me describe the handbook figuratively and then more tangibly. Either way, the handbook was born out of frustration with the ways that dignity was used in American jurisprudence. We noticed that oftentimes dignity was left undefined or underexplained. And when it came to cases dealing with educational rights, it was often unmentioned. Now think about it, right? A graphic representation that we call a word, which indexes this thing called dignity, the inherent and inalienable quality of the human person, but wholly contingent in terms of its sense and its experience. One of the most powerful words on the planet. Its meanings treated as self-evident, used sloppily, I think, in self-explanatory ways to win an argument, but not to further understanding. Our hope for the handbook was for it to be of use to those eyes who could barely detect the tracery of dignity as it is enacted and embodied in social life. We wanted it to be a handbook for those who wished to see beyond the spectrum available to our meager eyes, those who wished in some ways to assimilate the capabilities of the Hubble and the Webb space telescopes and adopt them to social life here on Earth. We wanted it to be a handbook for those who wish to grow the social senses that were necessary, but that may only be widely available in some future century. One in which the generosity and the tenderness that is indigenous to dignity could be rendered colorfully and vividly. So we wanted to produce descriptions and accounts and explanations of dignity that would rival the images of those of the cotton candy nebula that we get from the space telescopes. The analytic goals of the handbook were to identify and understand the content. When I say content, here's one thing you can think: the practical guidance provided. And the criteria, the reasons an author or a speaker even chose to invoke the term. We wanted to understand the content and the criteria of dignity in legal documents. One more thing. We also searched for equivalent expressions. Why? Because there are many ways to make a dignity argument. You can make a dignity argument without even using the term. Even in the absence of the word, we had a hunch that even if the word wasn't present, you could still detect in some ways, perhaps, the dignity impulse present in human life. To paraphrase, his name is Aaron Barak. He's the former president of the Israeli Supreme Court. He called dignity a mother value. And we thought it was important for us to know the names of her daughters, right? So we could figure out all the different ways that dignity could manifest itself here on the planet. Where did we search? The complete court record in two landmark cases. Tennessee versus Lane, a 2004 Supreme Court case that dealt with the civil rights of people with disabilities, and Lobato versus Colorado, a 2013 case that challenged the constitutionality of our state's school financing system. Lane was explicitly a dignity case because the word punctuated the court record. Lobato was not. We could not locate substantive use of the word in Lobato. Today, we're going to focus on Tennessee versus Lane. How did we create this analytic framework, this method for reading legal documents in order to distill their dignity content? Slowly, carefully, ploddingly at times, and together. And we had two kinds of together, face-to-face and online. So we had digital versions of the court record uploaded to the cloud, about 2,000 pages across both cases. And we used a browser plugin called Hypothesis to read and annotate the various complaints, amicus briefs, oral arguments, opinions, all of it. So, and the permanence of the documents, coupled to the capacities of Hypothesis, it allowed us to read together without necessarily having to be together in the same place at the same time. Even when we were face-to-face, however, Hypothesis was the tool of choice because it functions kind of like a digital historian of thinking. And I'm going to show you a bird's eye view of what we did. It's kind of like a learning analytics snapshot, okay? So I'm going to share my screen here. Now, this is like a learning analytics software called Crowd Layers. And you see, this is sort of the grand statistical picture of what we did in Tennessee versus Lane. I can draw here too. So in total, we did 1,231 annotations. There were 9 participants across 52 documents, 204 threads over the course of 113 days with 118 tags. I mean, that's volume, right? That shows you a lot about how busy we were. There was a beehive of activity with all this. And we're up here. I think I'm back. There we go. So as I hand it to Frida, let me prepare you just a little bit for some terms or phrases that you're going to hear and that you should feel free to ask questions about. Annotation. When I say annotation, one thing you can think about is what? To read and write, right? To digitally mark up a text. Consolidation. To refine and sharpen what we think we know. Extract. It's a shorthand for a kind of analytic and perceptual action. Magnify. Same kind of shorthand. Stencil. Same sort of shorthand. Tag. An identifying marker. A definitional marker for a kind of thing that we found. So I think that preps it. You on point, Frida?
All the time, profe.
All right, well then take the microphone and you know what to do.
Muchas gracias, profe. Hello, everyone. My name is Frida. I'm one of R2l Senior Research Associates, and I've been with R2l for 5 years now. And I'm a proud first-generation college graduate. I graduated last year, May 2020. An amazing year to graduate. But now I'm working as a marketing assistant for a branding firm that partners with nonprofits and independent schools. And I share this bit of information because many of us in our research group have already graduated. Many have full-time careers. Some folks are parents. Some folks take care of family full-time. Some folks are PhD students, organizers. The point is, we are a team in constant grind and hustle. And after a busy week, we all choose to come together on Fridays to do R2l. And that is to envision and strategize a world infused with the language and lens of dignity. And I think it says a lot about the space we choose to cultivate as a research group. And because of it, I don't think we're your typical research group. And to further elaborate, this is how I like to think of R2l. Imagine a group of researchers, us. We are paleontologists out somewhere desolate, excavating fossils. But the tools we have inherited are not really serving us anymore. So what do? We create our own tools. We create our own methods and processes collectively to excavate dignity. And because we are building every step of the way, creating our own tools and processes, always in the weeds of the work we are doing, it wasn't until we took a step back and saw what we were actually doing. And it's actually quite beautiful. Opportunities like this to talk at R2l really forces us to take a step back and see the larger image at hand and see, oh, that's what we were doing and that's how we were doing it. And then be able to compartmentalize our work so we can come to you all and communicate it to you all today. There are two things, Now what I will be doing in this part of the lecture is taking you through our annotation process and share with you the tools that we used. A reminder, the tools, the processes once did not have names, and they were consistently in the making. And the story of our annotation process is in part the story of R2l. And we organize the structure of our work now, so we hope that you can take two things away from our lecture. The first is a lens for identifying and recognizing dignity. Where? In work, spaces, relations, and people where we usually don't associate dignity. The second is a lens to explain how we excavate and elevate dignity. And keeping those two things in mind, I will now begin by walking you through our annotation process through the US Supreme Court case, Lane versus Tennessee. Excuse me. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Open that up. Can you see that, Profe? Does that all look good?
Yes, Frida, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So in this deck, there are two phases in our annotation process that we now name consensus and consolidation, both of which had their own individual tools for pinpointing the term dignity, what it is and what it meant in the Lane versus Tennessee case. In the first phase, we use the extract and magnify tool. And this means we extracted the term dignity into three parts: its content, criteria, and its possible equivalent expressions. Once we identified dignity in a court case document, we magnified the excerpt, so to speak, and read closely and would make an annotation as to what category of dignity it fell into. So once someone identified in the documents what might stand as content or criteria, they would make their annotation, and R2l members would jump in and would either critique the annotation or would support it, gathering consensus, and thus the name for the first phase. And these parts of dignity, content, criteria, equivalent expression were not rigid, as we ourselves in this first phase were trying to understand what constituted content versus criteria, and thus parts overlapped. And because of this, In order to help us focus the excerpts we were annotating, we needed at least 4 folks to weigh in on the initial annotation. And if all 4 folks supported it, we had a category of dignity in which the excerpt fell into. But let me show you what this looks like on the software program that we used. Okay, so I know this is a little bit difficult to see. So what you are looking at in this deck right here, on the left side, we have a document of the Lane versus Tennessee case in a PDF format on Hypothesis, the annotation software program that we use. And on the right side, you see a few excerpts, and those are folks annotating and then replying to one another. Again, I know this is difficult to see a little bit, but I just wanted to give you a preview of what this looked like when we were annotating online. But for the purposes of the presentation today, I'm going to show you what was written in the annotation on a Google document. So one of the annotations in phase 1 called annotation 8.1 lies in that document that I showed you on the previous page. It lies in in section 1 called Title 2 of the ADA is beginning to allow persons with disabilities to participate in public life, and it lies in subsection D, public transportation. So in this section, my colleague Mandy Long highlights the excerpt in light orange right there, and it reads, "Living independently and with dignity means opportunity to participate fully in every activity of daily life." In her annotation, she states, bingo, she has identified an excerpt that might be Dignity's criteria and content. My colleague and founding partner, Tania Valenzuela, is the first person to support the annotation. And because she is the first person, she labels her annotation with the following hashtag, #consensus1, signifying her support and that she is the first person on the annotation. The second supporter, in this case, it was Profe, adds his 2 cents, labels his annotation, #consensus2, and so forth. Now, I will walk you through this rich discussion that we had in this annotation 8.1, but I won't read the full discussion. I will only highlight or relay the yellow highlighted portions. So again, we start with the annotation with Mandy. She has highlighted her excerpt. She believes it falls under content and criteria. Tania supports this annotation, but puts an argument that this excerpt exemplifies dignity content, not both content and criteria, and encourages the team to move forward with this new lens. And she states, the sentence literally says, the sentence literally says, dignity means opportunity to participate fully in every activity of daily life, which I believe adds to the definition of dignity put forth advocates of rights and dignity to the courts. Profe responds. So what you're seeing in this deck, just so everybody knows, is just a continuation of the discussion. So Profe responds to Tania, I add my vote of yes. In the near future, we will have to work out the question of whether full participation and meaningful participation are synonymous, interchangeable with dignity itself. Here, I think Profe does something cool. He responds, but with a twist, or provides like a new angle to consider with these 2 notions of full participation and meaningful participation. Our colleague, Arliss Howard, responds to Profe, and this is what she states. I do feel there is a difference between being able to meaningfully participate and having full participation. I feel the latter means that one is able to participate in those things that are small or looked at as unimportant, like the passage list farther down, going to movies, dinner, baseball, game, etc. Whereas meaningful participation to me means the ability to participate in voting, court access, etc. Here, Arliss elaborates on Profe's point and extends the text to make the distinction between meaningful participation and participate fully. Our colleague, Raquel Isaac, is the last person to annotate and concludes. I don't think that full participation and meaningful participation are the same. Meaningful participation means going to school and getting a dignified education, not just getting to go to school. Raquel clarifies on Arliss's distinction and beautifully concludes and ties the annotation together to be an example of dignity content. This right here, what I just read, is the anatomy of an annotation in phase 1. This is what it looks like. And to elaborate on the thought process behind this discussion, for many of us, it was a very excruciating process at times. Annotating to one another, there's a flow here that we see, but when we annotated or reply to one another, I should say, it was a process that we didn't take lightly. And I think this excerpt right here is just an example of how we ourselves in this conversation, we're trying to affirm on our team members' dignity and take the time to really invest ourselves in what they were saying, read in between the lines, ponder, think, and spend time to provide something meaningful to our members and to the discussion of dignity. And again, I share that in part, this story of the annotation process is the story of R2l. And now what I will do is move on to the second phase, which is called the consolidation phase. Okay, so here we focus on refining our understanding of dignity, its content, criteria, equivalent expression, by consolidating the annotations in the first phase with a more elaborate tool, a stencil, one that was in the making, in which we placed on top of our annotation discussions to help us craft a more precise understanding of dignity. An example of this, because I'm a visual person and I like to think of it in this manner, it's us coming back to our excavation site and seeing our fossils. You know, they look a little dusty. They can definitely be cleaned up a little bit with a new tool we developed with the knowledge we have gained since our first excavation. And actually, it was a year and several months in between phase 1 and phase 2. And in that gap year, R2l did a lot of amazing things. In March, we went to DC and participated in the Association for the Study of Law, Culture, Humanities Conference at Georgetown. And we asked folks, hey, do we make sense? And in the summer, we transcribed audio from the Highlander Folk School audio collection, a compilation of recordings of community organizing activities from the citizenship program taught to Black Americans. We also just met monthly, touching base on our readings and trying to make sense of our work. And with the second phase, the consolidation phase, the parts that make up the stencil tool helped us refine our understanding of dignity. And Profe has said previously, you know, even ourselves, we're not only excavating and elevating dignity from other pieces of work, we ourselves are trying to replicate that same work here, trying to investigate what dignity means in this context of our own research. And I had the privilege to do that with our work. This second part, which I will discuss, I was not part of that annotation phase, the consolidation phase, I should say. I was out the summer for an internship, but looking back at what we had done, touching base with our members and kind of seeing like a bird's view of what has done is beautiful. And it just shows that time passes, but we come back and we get to use the tools we use to look at dignity in our own work. Alrighty, so what we're seeing in this deck right here, again, I just wanted to show you what the stencil tool looks like on hypothesis. So here, let me go back real quick. So compared to what was done here, for example, here on the right side, we have folks are replying to one another. What this looks like in the consolidation process looks very different. So here, this is actually one person leading the way with the consolidation process. And it's a little bit more formatted, if you can see. And again, I know it's a little bit difficult to kind of make up what's on here, but again, this is on hypothesis, but for the purposes, I will show you this organized look on our Google documents right here. So this is a stencil tool, and I will walk you through each of these sections in light blue, still using annotation 8.1 as an example of of an annotation that we saw potential to be refined through consolidation efforts. And the second round review was actually led by my colleague Maria Sanchez Velasco. And I will begin by first walking you through that first part called changes right there at the top. With changes, we looked at the highlighted portion from the consensus phase and identified if the highlighted portion needed to be extended or shortened to fully embody content criteria or equivalent expression. So remember back to the deck, I'm gonna kind of go back real quick. This is what Mandy had highlighted in that light orange sentence. Now what was done, it was extended to this yellow portion. And what you see right here is the exact same portion, but now it's this extended new section. And I'm gonna actually pause here and give you all a few minutes, or not minutes, a few seconds to just skim over it real quick. Okay, I'm sorry. I know that's not a lot of time. If you got a chance to skim through it, great. If you didn't, because you like to digest the text, like myself, take time with it. Don't worry. I think the next decks will kind of reference back this piece. Okay, now we're going to move on to the second section, which is primary category. In this section here, we labeled the excerpt to be the part of dignity it fell into. So in this case, it was dignity content. With the next section, the summary, the text that follows is an abstract of all the discussion that led to that point. And again, because I'm a visual person, what I like to think of this section is kind of like a black, I want to say a black hole or like a portal in which, because this excerpt kind of traces back to the work that we did in the annotation phase. So it kind of shows you what was done in the past, what led to that point. So that's what bid summary is. And I'm gonna stop here real quick, again, to give you a few seconds to look over real quick what Maria put down for bid summary. Okay, now I'm gonna move on to definition. And with that middle section here, Maria, what she does is defines what dignity, in this section, Maria here defines what the dignity category means given what was discussed and changed, and it reads, This is an example of dignity content, not only for its deliberate use of the word dignity, but also for the examples that it gives us as to how people can have their dignity affirmed. These experiences are just a few ways in which it is possible to feel a sense of dignity. Maria now shows us through this text how the new extended excerpt has now provided us with a greater context that represents dignity content through the examples of dignity being affirmed. Now with the last section called rational tags. In this section, the consolidator, again, Maria, adds tags that are most suited for this consolidation and provides a rationale for using them. In this case, Maria chose dignity content and meaningful participation. And I'm gonna share that here. So this is what Maria states for dignity content. This annotation merits the dignity content tag because it is an instance in which an explicit definition or distinguishing characteristic of dignity is communicated. The sentence that begins with, living independently and with dignity, points to the importance of everyday activities and the dignity of the human person. Additionally, this annotation can be interpreted as an affirmation of the right of every person to have their humanity recognized. With meaningful participation, she states, We think meaningful participation is implied when Dole says participate fully. We take meaningful participation to mean unambiguously effective involvement in socially vital activities structured by social relations that are reciprocal and dialogical. This process, as we reflect back, helped us develop our dignity lens as young dignity scholars, whereas one might read the term dignity in a court case and consider it simply a piece of rhetoric. We are thinking about the power of identifying dignity affirmed or indignity in these social settings, and then elaborating on its content, criteria, equivalent expression to be able to communicate it and make it pronounced in the spaces we stand. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Profe.
Thank you, Frida. Thank you. That was on point. Cool. So let me try and wrap things up a bit here. Why study it in this way and with such intensity and with such focus? The right to learn way is really to let the problem demand what it is that we have to learn, and we're the ones who respond, right? Think about it. If we are making the case that the education clause of the Colorado Constitution ought to be changed and it should be rewritten in the language of human rights, then we better know more about dignity than anyone else. What we lack in terms of money, access to power, inherited status with respect to sort of influence at the Capitol, we had to make up for in terms of just knowing way more than anybody that we talk to up at the state. So let me show you here what we're doing with all of this, right? Because a person doesn't sharpen a scalpel if you don't intend to cut something. You don't do that to leave it on the tray. So here's the education clause of the Colorado Constitution at present. The General Assembly shall, as soon as practicable, provide for the establishment and maintenance of a thorough and uniform system of free public schools throughout the state, wherein all residents of the state between the ages of 6 and 21 years may be educated gratuitously. One or more public schools shall be maintained in each school district within the state, at least 3 months in each year. Any school district failing to have such school shall not be entitled to receive any portion of the school fund for that year. That's from 1876, the year of Colorado's statehood. And perhaps it is progressive for its time. Think about the progressive elements in it. Public school is going to be free and everyone gets at least about 100 days of schooling. We've learned quite a bit since 1876. And what this education clause has fostered is a historical tendency to interpret the mandate from a bare legal minimum standpoint, whereas the language of dignity opens up a different field of vision. It allows us to strive and arch toward the moral maximum. The language of educational dignity supplants thorough and uniform with the language of human rights. And that allows us to do two things. So one, education would cease to be merely a governmental service on the spectrum somewhere between food stamps and protecting a person's right to vote. Our candidate amendment elevates education to the status of fundamental right, a right that is necessary for the continuation of freedom and justice. And that is not for us just something by fiat. There is a theory of the human person that undergirds modern dignity thinking. There's history, anthropology, law, and psychology as the armature of our candidate and amendment. Here's the second thing that it does. The inherent and inalienable dignity of the human personality. And I want to say that's a really like a wonderful, lovely term, the human personality. All that a person has been, all that a person is, all that a person could become. What it means is that the human personality comes embroidered with rights. Rights beget protections. Rights give birth to duties and obligations to the human person. Thorough and uniform centers the governmental actor, and it sets an appallingly anemic and low standard for the state actor to simply make a determination of when enough is enough, right? What should suffice? Dignity does something different. Dignity and its attendant language centers the human person and what he, she, they need in order to thrive and flourish as human beings. Now contrast that to thorough and uniform, which gives governmental actors wide latitude in determining what will suffice. That's the potentially transformative shift that an education clause in a constitution can foster. After that, the problem is one of implementation. So let me share one sentence from our candidate amendment, and it is the second sentence in our draft and the one that we think, the group thinks, is the most complete as of today. Public schools are sanctuaries, spaces where the inherent and inalienable dignity of the human person is inviolate. Colegas, imagine what a principal, a teacher, a parent, a lawyer, a student could do with that kind of mandate. Imagine the schools that could come of that, the kinds of social relations that could be cultivated in the service of creatively defending and affirming the dignity of each and every human person. In the Right to Learn Dignity Lab, we think that the best days, that the most glorious days of public education in Colorado are still ahead. And we are unabashed in insisting upon this possibility. And I have to give credit, all credit and love to what I'm about to say to Lalo Delgado, who is the Chicano poet, the former Chicano poet laureate of Colorado, may he rest in peace. Children, adolescents, adults do not have to die with 1,000 masterpieces hanging only from their mind. Rather, they should live with the expectation that their state will pay deference to the magnitude of their potential, so that a person could decide for herself, himself, themselves, which wonders are made manifest in this life. Thank you. Frida, did we do okay?
I think we did all right.
Man, I hope so.
No,
we'll see.
You all did more than all right. You were fantastic. So thank you both for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. We appreciate it. So we have a few questions in the chat. We have about 10, 15 minutes. So the first one is for Frida. So Frida, first off, congratulations in graduating in general, then especially in the global pandemic. So props to you. So one question that came in was, now that you've graduated, you moved on to your career, what is it that motivates you to come back into the lab and continue to engage in this work?
That's a really, really good question. I mean, I think, unfortunately, there's, how should I, work is, and I'm not sure if people will agree with me, but sometimes work doesn't fulfill the passion, the need, right? It's there because for many of us, we need a livable wage, right? So we work, and being a research associate with R2l, when we've had money, we've been able to provide our associates with, pay for their time. But even though, I guess what I'm saying is, my passion is rooted in social justice, education, and dignity. And R2l fills me with such joy and passion. I began with R2l when I was a freshman, like Profe said, in college. And I think I took that class by accident. I don't know. It wasn't in my class requirements, but I took it. I'm like, oh, this sounds kind of neat. But it's work that needs to be done, and it's work that I'm passionate about fueling. And even though obviously my work, I love it, it doesn't fuel the anger I feel inside of me that I need to channel it somewhere for deep change for the students of my state and all over. And I just love the people that I work with. We've all been here for years and years and years, and we just love each other so much, and we're so invested in the work we are doing. And it's just passion, it's a purpose, it's a drive that if it's not being fueled, but I do have passion for the work I do, but R2l is my home, it's my space, it's where we know that we could be loud, we can make change. I'm not sure if that was a question that was asked, I think.
No, thank you, Frida. That was very enlightening. We appreciate it. So Profe, the next question is for you. So particularly the last few years with some people having an awakening to like anti-Black violence, anti-immigrant sentiment, the attempted insurrection at the Capitol earlier this year, particularly for K through 12 teachers, what would be your advice to them as they try to foster, some would say civic engagement or participation, but a more critical way of viewing their surroundings and trying to engage in some of this work, particularly with the constraints of standardized testing and or scripted curriculum at the K through 12 level?
Sure. Thank you, Ruben. Thank you. Maybe it gets at some of the last things that I said. It is put forth in all the major human rights instruments, as well as their addendums, as well as the essays that are meant to interpret what the duties and obligations are, that it is the responsibility of each and every human person to uphold and affirm the human rights of each other, right? But there's also a document that comes from the late 90s that deals specifically with educators. And in that document, they are called defenders of human rights. And I think to be able to approach the craft, the vocation, the profession of organizing, teaching, and learning for other people as a defender of human rights, I think it opens up creative possibilities that are simply not there in terms of you thinking about what it is that, if you thought about it in terms of a 9-to-5 job with a more or less okay benefits package, right? I think there are ways to re-enter the profession, the vocation, the calling of schooling through that language of human rights. It changes the way that you design, the way that you view, and what it is that you think that you owe young people. If you consider yourself a creative defender of human rights, probably the first thing that you would have to figure out for yourself is how is it that I am going to become the person that can extend to these young people perpetual positive regard every time I see them. That's like the everyday work, right? So perhaps there's I think resources are there for people to reimagine how it is that they show up on Monday mornings.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. So another question in the chat for both of you is, how have the group's ethnographic sensibilities grown and or changed throughout the last few years together in the work you all have been involved in?
Say it one more time, Ruben.
Yeah, so how have the group's ethnographic sensibilities grown and or changed throughout the last few years that you all have worked together?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and I can't wait to hear Frida's answer. If I can start off, what's been really beautiful to see is over the course of, let's say most especially, more intensely over the last 4 to 5 years, we have become more of one interdisciplinary mind, right? Because we have to read everything. We have to read in the law, we have to read in the history of ed, we have to read in anthropology, we have to read in ethnography, and so on, right? We have to read poetry, literature, the whole thing to understand what to do with language. That's a beautiful coming together. And we've created this sort of right to learn educational dignity language. And the way that I think that I know that is that when we look at some of those documents, some of those annotations, Ruben, I can't remember if I participated in the writing of that sentence, but it really doesn't matter because either any one of us perhaps could have written it, So we've done this really cool thing about coming together on the same page without having to agree about everything. Because if you lose that, you lose something very vital in the educational process. Frida, what do you think?
Repeat the question one more time.
Yeah, so how have your ethnographic sensibilities or your approach to the research grown and or changed?
Okay, thank you, Ruben. I concur with everything that Profe said. I think just from my perspective as a student, being able to read, the material that Profe has provided to help us understand and articulate dignity, not within the text, but even within ourselves. I think we've, in my perspective, have become more confident in what we're putting out, and what we're writing and what we are putting out to the world. Being a young student in R2l my freshman year, and hearing Profe, speak so poetically, so with such language, and I was just like, oh my God, like these members are brilliant. But I think we're all growing together, and we're all becoming very confident in the work that we're doing. And I think, again, these opportunities really help us, again, each time we're doing it, help us refine like our thought process and our approach to the work that we're doing.
Ruben, if I can add one thing, like so much of my work was about trying to convince these young people what it is that I saw in social interaction, because it's not readily apparent. And it would just like, and there's nothing I could do except make the argument as clearly and as insistently as possible. But of course, like if like there were these moments where like, Profe, no entiendo lo que me estás diciendo. I don't understand what you're saying, bro. Like I don't see it yet, And there was that too,
No, that's beautiful. And even with this idea and concept of dignity, there's in the chat. It's not a question, it's a comment, but I feel it brings us full circle. So a participant put that, Profe, so you were one of my first profes at UCD during my teacher credential and master's program around 2011. You taught me more about writing language and what it means to be a teacher and a colega than any other teacher I've ever had. I still have your handwritten feedback on my papers that I revisit from time to time.
That's Allison. Oh, what's up, Allison? Oh, that's beautiful, man. Sometimes it's a trip, huh, Ruben, to think that you've been part of these kinds of things, And it's really beautiful just to hear that. Oh my goodness.
No, and it's also a testament to your work and the learning spaces that you're able to foster with students, which is beautiful. So we still have a few minutes. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. So one question in the chat is, when it comes to fostering spaces that respect learners' dignity in the work that you all do, what does that look like, sound like, and feel like if we were to walk into those spaces?
Frida, you go first. I'll go second.
It's so hard to keep that short. I don't know. I'm gonna be a little bit personal, I think. So my mom is a custodian at a Boulder Valley School District school here in Colorado, obviously. And sometimes, okay, where am I trying to go with this? My mom is an advocate for the children who aren't listened, who aren't taken into consideration, who are seen as just troublemakers, who are seen as just, trying to be rowdy for rowdy's sake. And there's teachers, it's a school that pegs itself for being, progressive, elementary school, yet it neglects a lot of its students, and many of whom are students of color, and see them as just troublemakers. And my mom, being also like a woman of color, she understands, she listens to the students where, oh, why are you throwing a fit? Oh, because your shoes are too tight, because your shoes have holes in them, or why is this teacher, putting your backpack at the top of the shelf where you can't reach it, just you, and it's taking a time to kind of see beyond, just the setting in which they are in that education setting, and seeing where they come from, their background, what might be going on at home. It's taking that time to really see students and recognize their want to fight to have a better life, and not just determining it for them. So I think that's in part one.
Let me give you an example, Ruben, of how it's made manifest in Right to Learn. There's this thing that we've recognized and sort of noticed about ourselves. We call it the R2l Pause. Let us say that someone makes a question or an assertion, and let us say that it is not readily apparent what the person meant. we simply wait. We wait 30 seconds. Sometimes we have recordings in which we go to lunch, come back, and we're still waiting. Sometimes we wait like 1 week or 2 weeks for the person to explain themselves. And the reason that we do that is that if Frida says it, or Mandy says it, or Raquel says it, by the virtue of that very fact, it has to be listened to and reasoned through somehow. And that just makes things, of course, in some ways, slower, right? But I think the communicative economy of an educational environment that is organized around the principles of dignity, it moves differently than one that is just wholly sort of results oriented, because we care about results too, but not to sacrifice the process or any one person either.
I want to say thank you to Dr. Espinoza, or Profe, as I've heard you refer to over and over again, to Ms. Silva, and thank you, of course, to Ruben. So we wanted to just say, yes, thank you for that, but then also to thank everyone who showed up today in attendance. Your support means absolutely the most to us. And so we have been working very hard on the R2l Winter series. And so thank you again to Dr. Brown, to Terrence, Ruben. You really held us down with facilitating this. So we're much appreciative of that. We want to, before you go, let you know that we will have a spring series. We will be back April 1st with Dr. Monica Gonzalez Ibarra, and she'll be coming from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So join us again in April, and we look forward to having you. With that, we will see you then. Thank you so much.